Do you like books in which verbosity is substituted for profundity? Do you like books with paragraphs comprised of rambling nonsense, words strung together with no semblance of coherence or actual meaning? Do you like books in which characters speak like a lobotomized extraterrestrial impersonating human beings? Well, if you do, then allow me to present you with Nightwood by Juna Barnes.
The D is silent.
A seminal modernist text, albeit one which has fallen into a certain degree of obscurity due to its notorious difficulty, and one whose obscurity I believe is well warranted. That is to say, I did not think very highly of Juna Barnes's Nightwood. In fact, I did not really hold this book in much of a high regard whatsoever. This is not really literature to me. Rather, this is a hat trick. This is sleight of hand. This is very pretty words put together in a way that ultimately means nothing. This is sound and fury signifying nothing. So, uh, I cut my teeth last year um, with modernism with Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse. I've read some postmodernist works such as Gravity's Rainbow, hated it. Infinite Jest, loved it. But I hadn't really actually read any of the old school modernist novels like Ulysses, even though right now I have that one up here on the shelf to be read at some point. But I cut my teeth, like I said last year, with To the Lighthouse. That was my introduction to the old modernist novels of like the early 20th century. And you know what? I really loved that book. It was not very exciting, but it nonetheless held me wrapped because of the genuine profundity of it and the actual depth of its meaning, as well as the beauty of its language and the depth of its characters. Nightwood is not like that in the slightest. Nightwood is it's basically a house of cards. It's a really intricately constructed work of art which is mostly empty space and which falls apart very quickly if you actually subject it to any degree of scrutiny. So, to summarize what Nightwood is, well, that's hard to do because almost nothing happens in this book. The tenuous thread of the plot is so often lost in the rambling gibberish that it's hard to follow. But when you can follow that weak thread of plot, it's a lesbian love triangle between three women, none of whom are fleshed out to any degree whatsoever, and whom we subsequently do not care about at all, or at least this reader didn't. The women in question are Robin Vote, a home wrecking bitch, Nora Flood, a whiny, irredeemably hapless twit, and Jenny Petherbridge, I don't even know whatever she is, the hypotenuse of that triangle, I guess, the third point, whatever. I don't know. This book is it was one of the earliest books to deal, or at least of the 20th century, at least, to really deal with homosexual relations between women and openly homoerotic relationships, like actual lesbian relationships. And so that the merits of this work are kind of heaped upon something that it doesn't really support. That is to say, if you're wanting to read some classic proto queer literature, you ain't going to find much here because the romantic entanglements of these characters isn't really what this book is about so much, because this book really isn't about anything, I don't think. Um, the characters in this book are thinner than the paper they exist upon. Nothing really. There's so little in the way of actual plot. I think it's better to read this book, to read Nightwood, not so much as a novel as a loosely connected series of vignettes, because there's not much in the way of like an overarching plot. It's more just a series of incidents containing the same characters. That's pretty much all it is. So I I don't know why I read this, honestly. Well, I do know why, because I'd heard that it's so highly regarded. T.S. Eliot just jerked himself off over this, apparently, because he wrote this glowing introduction to this book, which says absolutely nothing about it other than that if you don't get it on the first try, read it again. Well, sorry, T.S. Eliot, I don't believe I'll be reading this again because this was a joyless and pointless reading experience to me. So, the writing in this book is the main allure because that's why it's noteworthy. It is of noteworthy difficulty because of its writing. But the problem is that there is no reward for the effort that the reader has to put in, or at least not with this reader. So there are lots of books out there that are of a high degree of difficulty, but the ultimate merit of a book lies in how much it pays out for how much you put in. A great example of a very difficult book that was, to me at least, wholly worthwhile after I finished it was Moby Dick by Herman Melville. That book is also notoriously difficult and hard to read, if only because it's so boring. But there is so much to unpack in that book. And even though it doesn't come right out and tell you what it's about, it allows you to feel enough of its thematic content to understand pretty much what Herman Melville was doing. That is to say that Herman Melville was actually doing something with that book. Nightwood is not like that. Nightwood is real pretty words that don't ultimately mean anything and are not don't even really make any kind of sense if you actually break down what these words actually mean in the way that they are put together. Also, if you ever run into any human that speaks like the people in this book, you probably need to get the heck away from that person very quickly because they are not a normal person. That is to say that Juna Barnes's dialogue, the words, the lines that she has these characters speak in Nightwood is inhuman would be an understatement. But, and to preempt any contradictions that I know will ensue. Somebody will inevitably come upon this review and call me a Philistine. They'll say, "You are just not enlightened enough to appreciate this work of art. You're just not getting the meaning." Uh, well, I have devised a test to see whether there really is any meaning to be had here. So I have extracted from Nightwood a certain number of passages, excerpts, if you will. And I'm going to read through these excerpts, of which there are three, and I'm going to tell you up front that one of these excerpts is of my own devising. That is to say, I intentionally mimicked the nonsensical and schizophrenic writing style which Juna Barnes employs in this book in order to illustrate how easy it is to kind of imitate and ultimately dupe a reader into getting a false sense of profundity. So let's read through these three passages, and one of which is mine, two of which actually belong to the book, and let's see if you can't spot the fake. Now, uh, before we do that, let me just preempt any complaints of people saying, but of course it's not going to make any sense. You're taking it out of context. No, actually, these excerpts don't even make sense in the context of the book. So just to get that out of the way up front, these excerpts that I took out of the book are meant to be representative of what the entire reading experience is like. That is to say, utter madness, really. So let's take a look at these three excerpts, one of which is mine, two of which actually belong to the book, and let's see if you can't tell which one is the fake and which are the real. All right, starting out with passage number one, we have this gem. The scourge of time is anesthetic by nature, inuring us to our own degradation and so blinding us to our ruin. Galaxies of dust rise from dead men's bones, while the bereaved of heart wail mutely and in impotence. Know you of love? Know you of truth? As the martyr tastes of the pyre's flames, so we languish in the embrace of our own killers. This, I tell you, is the tragedy. Naught but one star fails, whilst a million are engendered. All right, that was option one. Let's see what option two holds. Passage number two. In time, everything is possible, and in space, everything forgivable. Life is but the intermediary vice. There is eternity to blush in. Life laid end to end is what brings on flux in the clergy. Can't you rest now, put down the pen? Oh, the poor worms that never arrive. Some strangely connived angel pray for us. We shall not encompass it. The defunctive murmur in the cardiac nerve has given us all our gait. That was option two. Let's see what number three brings. Passage number three. In the acceptance of depravity, the sense of the past is most fully captured. What is a ruin but time easing itself of endurance? Corruption is the age of time. It is the body and the blood of ecstasy, religion, and love. All right, so which passage do you think is the fake, and which ones do you think are the real? Lock your answers in now. Well, if you chose option one, you were correct. Option one was my own invention. The other two excerpts actually belonged into the book. But I use this to illustrate how this book is written in a deceptively hollow manner. And what I mean by that is whatever meaning is to be derived here, I believe, is rather impressionistic. What I mean is it gives you words that are so vague and so convoluted and really downright absurd that it allows you as the reader to impress upon it what you think you're seeing or what you would like to see there, because I don't really think there is much meaning in this book. Literally, so much of this book is just gibberish. And to rate this book, I guess if I had to, because this is hard to rate because this is lauded as some kind of seminal classic, but I don't think it's probably anybody's favorite book. So just for me, I think I would personally give it like a D. There are moments, and I mean very, very brief moments in this book where there actually does, like some of the characters when they're talking, they actually, well, there are very brief glimpses of them dropping this ridiculous manner of speech and actually saying something real, but those moments are few and far between. So ultimately, I didn't really get anything out of this book. The characters are non-existent, other than just the names on the paper. Um, it didn't give me any new insights into what it was like to be a lesbian woman in 1930s Paris, which is where and when this is set. Um, I certainly didn't get any kind of grand revelation or cosmic truth out of it or anything like that. It's, again, I think this book is um, it's got a good paint job on it, but the wood that is painted is rather rotten, I would say. So yeah, I just don't really know what else I can say about Juna Barnes's Nightwood. It did not impress me. I was not snowed by the writing in this because it was pretty apparent that it's just a snow job. It's just meant to throw a bunch of crap at you and hope that you take that for profound. But there was one moment in this book that actually did make me chuckle. Uh, and it is a moment which I cannot help but think that Miss Barnes wrote with a great degree of self awareness, because it almost appears to be the book commenting upon itself. And it is on page, in my edition at least, 104. And it says, I have a narrative, but you will be put to it to find it. That is pretty much Nightwood in a nutshell. I have a narrative, but you will be put to it to find it. And really, once you do find it, I think you will discover there isn't really much there to be found. It is a treasure chest buried, but with no treasure in it. And, or at least that was my experience reading Nightwood by Juna Barnes. But I mean, of course, there are loads of people out there that are gonna, come at me and negate me and say you're such a cretin. You don't appreciate the majesty of this book. I mean, to each their own. I'm not saying you can't like this book at all. By all means, if you enjoy this book, don't let me dissuade you. You love this book if you want to love this book. Um, but for me, it wasn't that good. Again, to rate it, I would probably give it like a D. There were brief snatches of coherence, but they were very few and far between, and it was too little too late by that point. So, yeah, I would give this like a D. I know a lot of people would probably give it like an A plus plus or whatnot because it is such a classic, but I don't really think it deserves that title. So, yeah, Nightwood by Juna Barnes. Have you read Nightwood? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything that I have said about it here today. If you have not read Nightwood, I'm not going to recommend this book because it was boring as all hell. The characters were, I didn't relate to anything in this book because there was so little to relate to in between the just blocks of just gobbledygook. So yeah, I'm not going to recommend it. But if you're into classic LGBT fiction, which this I think only loosely qualifies, then you might want to check it out for historical purposes, perhaps. But other than that, I don't really think there's much here to admire. But yeah, and as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to like, subscribe, help the channel out a little bit. I would greatly appreciate it. And until next time, peace.